Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Victoria, and I'm a Senior Business Development Coordinator at 2H Offshore. With many industry events and conferences canceled due to COVID-19, we've put together this series of live webinars to keep our valued clients and colleagues up to date on the latest happenings in the world of riser and conductor engineering. I want to welcome you all to our webinar today entitled How to Perform Technical Due Diligence for Asset Sales. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few important housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you soon, so please look out for a link to that in your email. Secondly, if you have technical or content-related questions today, please feel free to ask them at any time. You can use the Q&A box that is located on the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll go through as many questions as we can, but if you have further questions, feel free to contact our speaker directly after the presentation. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today, Dharmik Vidal. Dharmik is the Vice President of Claris Subsea Integrity, one of 2H Offshore's sister companies. Since Claris's inception, he has managed the Houston office operations and is responsible for the company's strategic growth initiatives, including digital innovations for integrity management. With over 14 years of experience, Dharmik has managed multi-asset integrity management projects covering SURF, pipelines, and mooring systems with specific experience in risk-based IM program development, life extension solutions, and delivering digital data management solutions. He holds a master's degree in environmental engineering from Oklahoma State University and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the National Institute of Technology in India. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Dharmik to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this talk today. We're excited to share some information about the topic at hand. In the current environment, as you may understand, in fact, for oil and gas industry, ever since the downturn in 2014 towards the end of it, we've seen asset sale as an activity that has come up quite a bit. And we thought this was a timely topic to provide some insights into what has been our experience and provide you with some key takeaways from today's meeting, such that if you are in the process of any similar asset sales, then it will help you in your job. So the objective for today is for me to help you understand the why and the how associated with the technical due diligence process. As you can imagine, it's a very complicated subject, a lot of variables. Passing of assets from projects to the operations team by themselves presents a lot of challenge, and the things get even more complicated when you have a handover from one operator to another. For that perspective, I would also like to put together some background. So the topic that I'm presenting here, I'm sharing more of the information associated with the buyer's perspective. So when you are in the receiving end of this sales, how do you prepare? You review the information and be set for a successful transition, maintaining operations, as well as I'm also going to share some longer term perspective with respect to tying in objectives of life extension, so that you are starting that process and utilizing this asset sale as an avenue to kickstart it much earlier. When we talk about asset sales, the asset can mean different things to different people, and within each transaction it could mean different things. What I'm focusing here is more around a subsea field, or it could be a floater facility, or it could be a combination thereof, and it could be one or more assets as well. And in our experience, we've been part of all of these, I should say. And of course, important to keep in mind the goals of why an operator has agreed to get into this asset sale, an acquisition, if I may say. And that could be vision of starting up just few more wells and tying it to the existing infrastructure. It could mean expanding the stake in the already existing field where they may have had minority stakes and a strategic goal of expanding oil and gas portfolio. Or it could mean ownership of a facility such that future tiebacks offerings I'm sorry, I had some issues. Are you able to hear me?
Yep, sounds great, Dharmik.
Yeah, sorry, I had some issue with my microphone. Anyway, getting back to the point, the long-term objectives are equally important to keep in mind, and the strategic goals of why the acquisition was has taken place. So when we talk about any kind of acquisition or this kind of a sale, let's think of the end goal. What would help the buyer? And I couldn't resist but to put this together, which is the Carfax report snapshot. Even when you go to buy a car, you have a facility here in North America where you can purchase a Carfax report, which is a vehicle history report, which gives you the VIN number identification of that vehicle, some specs and make and model of that car, the history of services that has been performed, any accidents, damages, or equipment or change outs that may have occurred, what is the mileage, and that kind of information. And I think something similar for an asset sale would be a great value to the buyer, where you can understand what are the risks, how long has it been in service, what was the design life, so on and so forth, the specs as well as operational condition, just to say what is the current condition. And just like you would take your car to a mechanic to also get your own inspection done, we have a similar concept here where you are acquiring a much higher value asset, and the complication with respect to the design, the number of equipment, the infrastructure involved, the age of the field, the type of degradation mechanisms that apply, which are age-based like corrosion or fatigue or some others, makes this process very complicated, and hence a key objective should be to strive to create your own version of a Carfax for the asset sale when you do that. As I said a few times now already, that and subsea asset and the challenges are quite complicated. So it is important that in order to arrive and develop something like this, we need to first understand and align in terms of risk management. So here is an example field, a floater with two wells. Well 1 produces independently from flow line 1, and well 2 produces independently from flow line 2. And let's just say this happens. We have an issue that has been observed in flow line 1. It could be a leak, it could be a production blockage, what have you. The only thing that we know for certain at this point of time is the clock is ticking. An operator needs to make a timely, well-informed decision in order to remediate this, to prevent any major risks of environment and whatnot. At the same time, can we reroute certain production of well 1 through the flow line 2 or not? So in this instance, at this manifold, we have an isolation valve that does allow rerouting of flow. What you need to know is, what is the operability of this valve? Do you have historic inspections that confirms one way or the other in terms of the functionality and condition of the valve? If we were to flow well 1 a certain level through the flow line 2, what are the flow assurance risks, and are they adequately managed? What additional operational philosophy changes may have to be made in order to safely have additional flow through flow line 2? And most importantly, you need to have documented information, both for your internal assurances as well as any regulatory body submissions for change of plans in production. This is just one scenario that I have painted here. And even in this scenario, I've just talked about a few topics which drive the attention of an operator before they can make a change. But as you can imagine, within a subsea field and different wells and different equipment, you've got several different challenges that make your job very difficult. It needs the appropriate due diligence. It needs the ability to make sure the informed decisions are being made, and you have a documented evidence for continued service forward as well. So when we talk about asset sales, I would like to say you tie in your goals of operations, which is at the handover to achieve a successful handover from the seller to your own cells as an operator. And you want to also find out how to achieve optimum production. And when I look at life extension, the typical goal is we want to add a desired number of years beyond the original design life. So how to successfully achieve that? If you tie these two goals together, the value of this due diligence exercise at the onset improves significantly, and you are building and working towards success of life extension, not just for handover itself. In order to understand this, there are two things that an operator is continuously balancing: risks and revenue. On one hand, we want to limit the risks and the associated consequences of any damage to the environment and safety of your operations team. How can we minimize these risks by expanding or by maximizing our revenue in a safe manner? That is the objective, whether I take the example of operations or we look at life extension. As I have previously said, even within the life cycle of an asset, from design, fabrication, installation, operations, to life extension or decommissioning, at every stage you are faced with a lot of challenge, different teams managing it, different objectives, potential for data loss, etc. And with an asset sale, you are extending or amplifying that problem most likely, because you have two different operator mindsets and practices where the asset is changing hands. And you want to ensure that you kept the risk and revenue in mind. And when I say maximize the revenue by limiting the risk, there are several instances where you are making a decision with respect to, do I continue running my equipment or my system as is? Is there adequate knowledge and documentation that's telling me there is a timely repair in place in sight, whether it is immediate, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, what have you? Or is it at a point where I may have to replace certain key critical equipment that may allow me to achieve my goals of, one, meeting the design life, and two, achieving the extended life? I think this is very important as an operator, or if you are a contractor who has been supporting the operator, you will appreciate the challenge of how complicated the systems are, and you need almost a method behind this madness to be able to have a prioritized way of looking at things, such that you achieve the compliance of your internal company goals, as well as you are able to adequately support any regulatory body audits. So let's delve into the asset handover process, and I have tried to simplify this in a manner that allows me to pass my points of what need to be looked at. So to begin with, we have a seller who is offering their asset, and if I can translate that, I'm saying they are offering you a lot of data. There's two, or I should say three buckets of data that we are looking at here. There's the static data, which I call it a static, meaning the spec of the equipment and the asset, design, fabrication, and installation. That's already occurred and it's not changed in terms of the information that you have. P&IDs, design reports, analysis report, what was the original Metocean criteria used, were there corrosion allowances built in, do we have the manufacturing data books? These are all the things you should look out for in the data that we are talking about. And then there is a dynamic information through the service life history, which is anomalies, risks, which are based from either inspections or monitoring information that has occurred. And so you as a buyer have a time-bound goal to review all of this information in terms of adequacy and availability of the documentation, reviewing it to ensure that you understand what it is and are able to go and have a few dialogue back with the seller to address the gaps in the system, right? I've said there are gaps as well. Now, of course, the seller is not going to upfront come and tell you, here are my gaps. I think that is the onus on the buyer. And that is why this due diligence process has an immense significance in terms of maybe not getting the full answers, but at least reviewing it adequately, where you feel comfortable in combining and developing an action plan. And that action plan has two goals. What are my immediate things that I need to address? in order to ensure safe and continued operation. As well as I will put the emphasis on a short-term plan as well, which is 1 to 3 years. That 1 to 3 year plan allows the time for you to translate the information that you achieved from the seller, understand it, and feed it into your existing processes such that if there is any translation of what a risk from the seller is versus what you do it, then it buys you that time and you don't have a looming threat which, if not addressed immediately, can create more problems for you. So key point here is, again, there is a time limit by which you have to have a cutoff date. You typically have a cutoff date after which you don't have that full access to the seller in terms of requesting additional data, clarifying information, so on and so forth. And the lesser information you have from operational integrity, it may add more onus for you as a buyer to maybe do some upfront inspection in assessing what is the current condition of your asset. So keep that in mind. And of course, if there are anomalies that need to be addressed immediately, then there may be remediation actions as well. So let's look at a bit more in terms of the data that we are talking here. The first one is if we have a facilities included. And by this I mean I'm including within the facilities topsides, your hull, your moorings, all of those information, right? It's important to make sure you've got the right UWILD reports, underwater inspection, your dry docks, in-service inspection plans as well, because if there is a scheduled campaign that has to be performed, you do not want to have the time, you do not want to spend the time to recreate anything in terms of an ISIPS or even if it's a subsea inspection. So you want to also make sure that that data has been received from the buyer. Any post-hurricane inspections that may be completed. But one of the key challenges that I think is also the scope demarcations of riser systems, moorings, especially if there are multiple stakeholders and ownership, shared ownership where one operator is the owner of the facility, subsea tiebacks by a different owner, export systems could be by another owner as well. That information is very crucial, and any agreements that previously may have been made in terms of information sharing, shared execution of activities, especially if it's topsides where a riser piping up to the pig trap could be your remit. However, the inspection execution typically may be where the owner of the facility conducts and shares that information. That could have been the arrangement. So I think I want to draw the attention towards that. And of course, any safety critical items that need to be addressed in the near term versus 1 to 3 year plan. Next is risers and pipelines and subsea hardware. Now, of course, there are a lot of different degradation mechanisms that occur. A key aspect being the internal condition of the entire production flow path. Has there been a history of inline inspections or smart picking or any direct measurements? What has been the chemical injection philosophy? How can we determine the current condition? Very important. And to share this in a bit more detail, one example I've chosen is, let's say, cathodic protection survey or this cathodic protection status of your system. So in this example, what I'm showing is a steel catenary riser, a flow line system. You've got plates, jumpers, plate, and control systems. So you can see in this example that I've shown, the design lives vary. The design was performed of different kit by different vendors. In this instance, SCR's flow lines was done by vendor 1, and the design life is 20 years. There's some information on what is the CP system comprising of. The plates are by, and then the manifolds are designed, and their design lives are a bit different, and so on and so forth, as you can see on the screen. Now, again, when the system is functioning, the CP is functioning as an integrated system, but this kind of information becomes very crucial, especially if you have known issues of, let's say, heavy depletion of anodes on certain kit, unexpected draw of currents from one to the other kit. And so both in terms of continued operations as well as life extension, you want to understand and know what it means in terms of the next steps. Is a retrofit design and installation imminent? Are there immediate fixes of installing continuity cables to re-establish adequacy of cathodic current on certain kit that seems to be unprotected. And worst case, if you do not have the operational history, then you may want to consider conducting a cathodic potential survey that works now for you as a reference going forward. Because the concept remains similar with respect to life extension or operations. If you do not have a history, that's not end of the world. It's just the path to achieve your goals slightly changes and effort increases upfront to be able to make that confident decisions. And lastly, I have control systems. What is the umbilical condition as of now? Understanding the redundancies, spare tubing availability within the umbilicals, blockages, a very common threat that occurs. What has been the remediation philosophy? Are there any blocked umbilicals that need immediate attention? Because immediately there may not be an action because you may want to continue the operation as is. But if there are plans of tieback, if you have a tieback that needs additional infield umbilical that needs to be tied into the existing control systems, the UTA, those kind of decisions are very important. And for that, if you have that end goal in mind, the ability to look at the data and ask the right questions and close these gaps becomes very important, because the goal is to understand what do you know. The goal is to also identify the gaps in the information and reduce the unknown unknowns significantly. That puts you and sets you for success. And here is an example of what I mean by design, fabrication, installation type of information. You want to know who are the manufacturing vendors, the date of installation, characteristic information of the design, pressures, temperatures, coating information, the specs of the coating, what was the CP system, physical properties, specifically age-based mechanisms. You want to understand, was there any corrosion allowance built in? Because there is always a challenge when you're looking at corrosion assessments or whatnot, whether you want to use nominal versus an actual measured. And in the absence of any measured data, if you have data books and actual data books, that can serve you much better than using nominal. So this becomes that static information that I was showing and mentioning earlier, PNIDs, general arrangement drawings, so on and so forth. And the other version is of the dynamic information, a prioritized traffic light system type based overview of the asset with respect to anomalies or non-conformances, whether they're known by defect type or equipment type. Has there been any risk assessments performed? And again, this goes back to what has been the philosophy of the previous operator in terms of how they implement an integrity management program. And monitoring based key performance indicators. So these are some examples of data that you have to look into to make sure you get the maximum information from the seller within the time frame that you have. If I put it in other form, we are all aware of the bathtub curve, and this is my take on a more customized or a realistic bathtub curve where through the asset life, different issues occur. The green line here is the managed risk level where you as an operator feel comfortable to have a degradation mechanism at that level to continue operations. And if any defect or a degradation mechanism reaches this level, an amber limit here, that's where you have a call for action, whether it's perform an engineering fitness for service study or consider repair or remediation. And this is where the viewpoint of previous operator versus your risk tolerance comes into play. And the due diligence extends from data review, gap adequacy to acceptability, risk tolerance, and defining the more focused integrity, more focused action plan. A point I would like to make here is we all understand that it is not about not having a degradation mechanism. Putting steel in marine environment is going to start creating problems. The type of systems we have, there are a lot of different threats that occur. And under normal operating conditions, an anomaly or a defect may give you more time to react and plan out appropriate action plan. However, consider that that same anomaly, if exposed to more severe conditions, for example, a hurricane condition, which as we see in the Gulf of Mexico here, we are experiencing a very harsh season this year. So it is very important where one example we have experienced that a top tension riser at the production deck had rollers that promoted vertical movement of the riser in relation to the vessel offset and the dynamic conditions. And there's a pin that locks the rollers in place. And there was one pin that was missing, which wasn't very urgent, but the risk of it experiencing a hurricane-like condition was much higher, and hence it forced and prioritized that activity much earlier than some other activities that were being planned within the action plan. So that's just one example, but I would like to highlight your attention that part of due diligence is equally putting into consideration these kind of decisions that allow you to say, what is my immediate action plan and what is my 1 to 3 year plan? And that is very important because you do not want to find yourself in a situation where some things that could have been identified was missed and creates an unwanted situation where the response can be much more elaborate than what you could have addressed it when the degradation was much lower, as I can say, within somewhere between the managed and the reassessment levels. So keep that in mind. But to do this, as you can understand, we've got a variety of degradation mechanisms that continue to play within a subsea asset. Internal corrosion being one. And through the production flow path, it has its own challenges. Not every operator does routinely perform an inline inspection, but there are other ways in which they manage it. Corrosion coupons on the top sides, chemical injection. You want to have access to all of that information handy. And this shows some example of what we have observed over a 15-year period, previously working as an integrity group within 2H and then independently for 5 years as a Claris Subsea Integrity. Erosion, external corrosion, I give you the example of cathodic protection survey. Fatigue for dynamic systems, risers. You want to know the environmental condition because when you're looking at a reanalysis, instead of using the original metocean criteria, you want to know what are the measured currents, wave heights, so on and so forth. Overstress condition, if I may take an example of pipeline free spans, have you measured them? Did you have an acceptable free span limit to compare and understand any spans that need remediation or assessment to confirm fitness for service? And if not, what is the remediation? Blockage, I gave the example of umbilicals, which is of the hydraulic fluid blockages versus production blockage in the first example I talked about understanding risk management. So the challenge goes back and the focus goes back again in terms of what the previous owner had in terms of an asset integrity management program. The better program you had, the more data you had, the easier task it is for you to review and come to a conclusive and confident action plan. The lesser information you have, the higher onus upfront to perform some inspections or for known issues, performing any engineering assessment to verify fitness for continued service. And subsequently, planning in for longer term or for life extension in terms of identifying critical equipment for remediation. One example I can think of is an export SCR system flex joints, where in our experience we've observed that if you have an elastomer anomaly, it has a finite life within which you may have to consider replacement. Similarly, in your experience, you may have observed different issues where what is the course of action with respect to progressively increasing from assessment to remediation to replacement. So with that, I would like to conclude in saying technical due diligence is very critical for asset sales, and you enhance the value of this exercise by combining the goals of life extension, where one of the key and first steps in life extension is the gap assessment study. The problem becomes very complex as it is within different groups within a single organization. But when you have a handover from one operator to another, your problem statement becomes a bit more complicated. So very important to have the right team with the right experience who can help you have a focused assessment in arriving at an outcome which is a targeted action plan. I will stress again, the targeted action plan has a bearing with respect to immediate activity as well as a 1 to 3 year plan, which buys you a bit more time in reassessing the risks, reprioritizing them based on your risk tolerance, getting the required time for your SMEs to feed in their viewpoints as well, and come up with an even more confident plan. And the data handover should include the static information of design, fabrication, and installation, the specs, the P&IDs, the data books, etc., to make sure you understand what was the original design intent, as well as the dynamic operational integrity information through the asset lifecycle, which includes inspection information. And within inspection, I would stress work procedures, completed campaign reports, videos, anomaly records or non-conformance records, as well as monitoring-based key performance indicator information that tell you what has been the philosophy of chemical injection, other parameters of environmental dynamic systems like risers, subsea equipment, or control systems. And that is a recipe of success to begin with. Do note that not all of this is possible within the stipulated time that you have for data handover from previous asset owners to yourselves. But it's a process that commences and has significant weight at that onset period where you have access to the operators who are selling the asset to you. That is the end of my presentation. Very quickly, as Victoria said, Claris is sister company with 2H, and we are part of Action Group, which has about 21 odd operating companies, independently supporting marine and subsea projects for the renewable, near construction, and oil and gas sectors. We cover all the stages of life cycle from pre-development all the way to decommissioning. And as part of Claris, our aim is to provide clarity to our clients by subsea integrity engineering in achieving the goals of compliance, uptime, and efficiency. I thank you for your time. I hope you found this talk useful and gets you thinking in the right direction. I will take questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Dharmik. That was great. We do have a few questions. Let me grab the first one. Okay. So if there is not enough time to perform a full-blown risk assessment during asset sales, how would you suggest a client get the prioritized action plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I do realize I have put in risks and anomalies. It goes back to a few points in terms of what has been the integrity management philosophy of the client. Most of the time, you're going to adopt what is already existing from the previous owner. In the event there is no risk assessment, you may find yourself as I said, the due diligence process commences at that point. So I think the focus should be more on getting the right information. And I would assume that at least you would have knowledge of anomalies in there, which is issues that need attention. So I think then in that instance, you would focus more on the anomalies. A risk assessment can be kicked off, but it can go beyond that time frame when you may not have the access to the previous operator. So I think it's not an easy question, and I do not necessarily recommend in saying you should complete within the stipulated time. You should initiate it if that is the philosophy, but I think the risk tolerance by each operator also varies. Some do prefer to have a risk-based approach, some have more experience-based approach, and it also depends on whether you're purchasing a single well tieback or you're procuring a much larger facility. And that's where, again, the last point is the experience of integrity management comes in quite handy. So we've helped some clients in doing that kind of an assessment without a full-blown risk assessment.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is there a regulatory requirement to perform technical due diligence?
Not that I'm aware of, but as I shared in my example, we like to have a Carfax report and even get our cars taken to a mechanical shop to get an inspection done. So if you're, it's just good practice, in my opinion, that you would want to have this conducted. And in my opinion, most operators do that in some form of fashion anyway. But the pointers here are to set for better and improved success so that you have more targeted visibility into what kind of data you need, and make sure that within the stipulated time you request the right information from the seller. But not that I'm aware of that says you shall have a technical due diligence. Now I will say that With life extension, there's an improved requirement and regulatory submission that goes into it, where a condition assessment is required, and hence my point of tying in the goals of life extension with the asset sale. If you are within that time frame window, it doesn't hurt. It sets you for success, and you will have regulatory requirements of in situ inspection, especially for time-based threats like corrosion or fatigue. So I'd say use the life extension requirements at that point, but there is no such requirement that I'm aware of that says for an asset sale, technical due diligence is needed. It's a best practice.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Does Claris have an established procedure for performing due diligence exercises, and what's the typical time frame for this?
Yes, we do have a methodology in place that allows us to help our clients in getting that targeted and informed action plan of immediate versus 1 to 3 years. It comes from a lot of experience that we've done with integrity management services that we've offered. Time frame has a lot of variables, so it depends on one, what is the contractual obligation between the two parties involved in asset sales, and as I said, the immediate need is to make sure that you've gotten hands on all that information and documentation prior to that expiration time frame, and accordingly getting the hands on anomalies as well. Plus, the access for queries back and forth with the team is the key focus within the stipulated time frame.